It was the last Friday in September when the district called about the missing maintenance crew up by Cedar Basin Dam, just a routine check. They said the crew's truck had been parked near the outflow since Wednesday, no radio contact, no checkout log. Probably dead batteries, maybe stuck tires. Still, 3 days without a call doesn't sit right, even for the lazy end of fire season. The road to Cedar Basin is one of those gravel switchbacks that feels like it's arguing with the mountain. You climb until the air smells of cold water and old metal. By the time I reached the access gate, fog had settled like concrete, thick, steady, no wind. The truck was there, government plates, doors locked, lights off. A thermos sat on the dash. Condensation made a fingerprint ghost against the windshield dot, no footprints in the mud leading away. None toward it, either. Just old tire tracks filled with rainwater. I keyed dispatch. Vehicle located, no crew in sight. They told me to check the dam control shed. Maybe they were inside working. The dam sits 50 yards down a narrow concrete path, half covered in moss. My boots left clean prints on the slick. At the door, the padlock hung open. Not broken, just undone. Inside, the shed was as it always is, a pump whine, the soft tick of gauges, and the kind of damp that gets into bones. But one thing wasn't normal. 3 safety vests hung on the back hook, all tagged with the crew's names. That's when you feel something. Not fear exactly, just the weight of math. 3 vests, 1 truck, no people. On the control panel, a clipboard lay open to yesterday's page. Notes stopped halfway through a line. Valve too slow response. Might need. Nothing after that. A pen lay broken beside it, ink puddled on the concrete. The water outside ran high, fast, almost angry. A branch hit the spillway grate and didn't pass through, caught and spinning in circles, thumping every few seconds like a heart you could hear. I followed the service path up to the right. It ends at a narrow bench above the reservoir. There, in the mud, were boot prints. Heavy, 3 sets at first, then 2, then one that trailed off toward the WATRLINE dot near the edge. Someone had driven a rebar stake into the soil. The top bent backward, as if pulled. Attached was a rope, frayed, ending midder. The rest of it, gone into the reservoir. I keyed dispatch again. No answer. Static, thick and clean like the radio was plugged into fog. I climbed back toward the truck. Halfway up, a sound cut through the dam's usual hum. A single shout, short, human. Could have been an echo. Could have been air venting. Could have been neither. Dot at the gate. Something new waited. A laminated tag tucked under the windshield wiper. Same paper we use for equipment checks, same font, wrong words. It read, inspection complete. Proceed west. I stood there a long time staring at the tag until the fog began to move, not clear, just shift like it was breathing. The road west leads nowhere but the maintenance yard 10 miles down, and those men never made it there. 2 days later, county divers found a length of nylon rope tangled in the intake grate. No bodies, no tools. The report filed as occupational accident, incomplete recovery. The new part? When I checked the shed a week later, the clipboard page had changed. The sentence was finished in neat handwriting, not like theirs. Valve too slow response. Might need a second hand. I left it alone. Sometimes the mountain takes attendance in ways we don't audit. Last winter, I worked temporary night patrol at the Lake Haven Recreation Area, easy money between contracts. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., looping the access roads and the old Ranger compound that's been half condemned since the flood. It's quiet work. Coffee, headlights, fog, coyotes. You get used to silence until silence gets used to you. The compound sits near the North Shore, 3 old cabins in a line. Only the first one still has power. We keep a desk, a first aid kit, and a portable heater there. The other two? Boarded up. Floor rot, black mold, the usual. On my second week, I noticed something off. A faint light behind the plywood of cabin 3. I killed my truck lights and watched. Every 30 seconds, it pulsed. Not steady like a bulb, but rhythmic, patient. I walked over thinking some local kids had rigged a flashlight prank. The padlock on the door hung in place, untouched. I pulled one board loose just enough to peek inside. Dark, no light, no sound. But the air smelled wrong, sweet, chemical, faint like nail polish. I put the board back and logged it as possible residual solvent. Next night, same thing. Pulse, pause, pulse. This time I timed it. 6 seconds on, 30 off. Like a beacon waiting for something to pass by at the right interval. I told myself to call it in, then didn't. Curiosity is cheaper than paperwork. On the 5th night, the light didn't blink from inside the cabin. It blinked from the tree line behind it. 3 pulses this time, bright, sharp, then gone. I walked 30 yards in with my flashlight low. In the snow, a single set of boot prints, narrow stride, deep heel. The kind of print that says the person was carrying something heavy or didn't want to be there long. Half buried under the snow near the last print lay a small black box, no bigger than a pack of cards. Inside, a circuit board, battery, LED light. Amateur build, but precise. Someone had placed it deliberately. No signal transmitter, no camera, just light. But the timing matched exactly the pattern I'd been watching all week. When I turned it over. A number scratched into the back, 7. No letters, no clue. At 2:30 a.m. As I drove back past the cabins, the heater in the truck cut off. Then the radio static for 2 beats, then a voice. You're early tonight. No call sign, no repeat, just that. I froze, engine running. Dispatch's frequency is narrow, only the Rangers use it. I keyed back, say again. Nothing. Just hiss. I spent the rest of the night circling the compound every half hour. The light didn't return. At dawn I checked the snow by cabin 3, the prints were gone. Wind swept clean, but the plywood had new scratches along one edge, as if pried and resealed. The padlock was new. Shiny brass. Not ours. I left the box with the district techs. They didn't find a transmitter, but the circuit was modified to respond to a pulse frequency, meaning it didn't blink on its own. It was waiting for a signal. A month later, when the thaw came, a hiker found 6 identical boxes buried under logs along the north access road, each with a number etched. In back, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Mine had been 7. One was missing. They called it a signal relay experiment. I called it practice. Sometimes I drive by that compound even now. Cabin 3 looks the same. Boards gray, windows blind. But every winter, for a few nights before the thaw, I still see that faint pulse through the plywood. Slow, steady, polite. Maybe it's wind reflection. Maybe it's someone timing us again. Early spring. I took a contract-running night watch at a remote sawmill up on the North Line, the kind of place where the machines sleep heavier than the men. The main yard was shut down for the season, but corporate liked having presence on site for insurance. Most nights it's nothing but wind and creaks. You read a book, drink cold coffee, and pretend the radio static is company. The office sits 50 yards from the mill floor. A corrugated tin cathedral full of sawdust ghosts. On my 3rd night, I heard footsteps on the metal walkway outside the office. Slow, careful, heavy enough to bend steel. I stepped out expecting a deer or a bear. Nothing, just moonlight on rust. Then I noticed the sawmill floor lights were on. I hadn't turned them on. The breaker box is inside the office, and I'm the only one with a key. I walked the catwalk down to the floor. every step echoing like it was trying to count itself. At the main table saw a clipboard lay open with the maintenance log from 3 months ago. New ink at the bottom, checked blades, adjusted tension. Night crew approved. We haven't had a night crew in years. I shut the lights, locked the doors, and told myself it was an old entry, maybe a prank from last season. At 1:14 a.m., the lights came back on. The switch by my desk never moved. Next morning, I found the breaker panel cover unscrewed and set neatly against the wall. Each breaker had a small number scratched next to it, 1 through 12, none of them factory marks. Someone had mapped the circuits. I ran the numbers against the floor plan. Breaker 5 fed the cameras. I checked the feed. The cameras had stopped recording at exactly 1:14 for 6 minutes. The gap was clean, no static, no freeze. Just nothing. That night I tried an experiment. I left the lights on, the breaker cover open, the camera feed rolling on a separate laptop. At 1:13, the feed flickered. At 1:14, all lights died. In that brief black silence, the floorboards creaked like weight settling. When the lights came back at 1:20, the clipboard on the saw table had a new line. Tension confirmed. Proceed to Unit 5, I looked. Unit 5 wasn't the saw, it was the generator out back. I walked out, the cold air sharp enough to feel like it wanted to help. The generator purred like always, but someone had spray painted a small X on the casing near the inspection plate. Fresh paint. Still tacky. I took photos, filed a report, and the regional office told me to document and observe. Code for don't make noise. Over the next week, the same pattern repeated. 1:14 a.m. blackout. 6 minutes later, power back. Each time, a new message appeared on the clipboard. Each line used the same hand, the same calm block letters. Proceed to Unit 5. Cooling verified. Output measured. Audit complete. By night 6, I'd had enough. I stayed on the catwalk that night with a thermos and a flashlight off. At 1:13, the mill sighed. That pre-electric silence, everything holding its breath. Then, faint but certain, footsteps below, circling the generator cage, slow, even, deliberate. I leaned over the railing, light ready. The footsteps stopped. When power returned, the clipboard had one more note. Presence detected. Shift ending. I never saw anyone leave. The mill stayed dark after that until summer, when new contractors came to refit the lines. They found a folding chair behind the generator, old, rusted, perfectly positioned facing the office window. On its seat, a small laminated tag read, Supervisor. I left it there. Some jobs keep their own attendants. It was late October when the district set me up to Cold River Oak to babysit the station for a week while the regular ranger waited on a knee surgery. The ridge sits far enough from town that radio turns into weather, and the road up is a gravel argument that never quite resolves. I signed the checkout sheet at 15:20. Loaded dry wood, a 5-gallon water cube, and a coil of stubborn optimism. Then crawled the last mile in second gear with the windows cracked, so I could hear if anything about the truck sounded expensive. Overlook cabins have a sameness I find comforting. Single room. Iron stove. 2 windows that refuse to square. A table that someone sanded aggressively in 1993 and never again. The tower itself is 50 yards off. A steel ladder up to a box the size of a shed. Glass on 4 sides, paint peeling into a geography of its own. You can see 30 miles on a clear day if you stand on your toes and lie to yourself. I swept mouse gravel off the bunk, stacked kindling, and took the radio outside, until I found the one patch of ground where the meter jumped from no to maybe. Dispatch heard the maybe part and told me there'd been reports of unauthorized reflectors showing up on boundary posts and Primitive sights, little mirror squares screwed in at odd heights, sometimes with tiny holes drilled behind them. If I saw any, photograph, bag, and don't speculate. You don't tell a person with my temperament not to speculate unless you want them to. Speculate alone. The first night came on fast. October light falls like a dropped plate intact, and then suddenly not. By 21 o'clock, the cabin window gave me my reflection instead of the ridge. I made coffee that smelled like a promise and walked the 50 yards to the truck to check the lock on the box where we keep the spare jack. On the way back, a pulse of white lit the fence post at the far edge of the clearing. One blink, clean as a camera flash. I froze and counted. 24 seconds later, another. I swung my headlamp off and let the dark lay hands on me. With the light gone, I could see a thumbnail glint on the post. A little square, I'd swear. Wasn't there at dusk? Up close, it was a fresh reflector. The sort you'd see on a child's bike, screwed in at shoulder height. Behind it, a pencil-width hole drilled neat into the weather gray wood. I backed a screw quarter turn, and the reflector wobbled, caught another blink from somewhere down the slope, and winked back like the first half of a conversation. I photographed it, unscrewed it, and found a short metal tube inside the hole, thin wire solder joints, heat shrink, the smell of burnt flux. Someone had nested hardware in our fence. The tube had a bit of masking tape wrapped around it with tiny block letters, Relay 9 North Ridge. I bagged it, trying to keep irritation out of the seal. Relay meant signal, meant schedule. The last time we'd pulled anything with that word on it was spring, and those had lived on trailhead kiosks like ticks. I radioed dispatch from the magic spot. Static gave me my own voice back half a second late. Back half a second late, and the squeal that means you're talking to yourself. I signed off and let the night be what it was. At 0:11, something knocked on the cabin wall. Not wind. 3 tidy raps, the rhythm of a person who expects an answer. I opened the door and met the cold. No one stood there. Frost had formed on duff like sugar sifted through a sieve, and in it, bare footprints. Not literally bare, but the toe prints were defined like a thin shoe, light tread, high arches. They came from the tree line, touched the siding near the knock, and walked straight to the overlook's fence post, ending where I'd pulled the reflector. I followed the prints to the edge and looked down. The forest below cupped darkness like a liquid. Another blink, deeper in 20-ish seconds later by my wrong counting. Answering a beacon with a beacon. Talk to me, and I'll talk to you back. I slept badly, stove ticking as it learned to be hot again. The relay tube and its evidence bag on the table, like a witness facing the wrong way. Morning was the good kind of cold, the kind that makes coffee taste like competence. I hiked the spur that drops 100 feet to the north, and found a second reflector on a cedar stump, screwed low this time, at knee height like it wanted kids or crouchers. No hole behind it, just a clean ring of fresh wood. When I pounded it, a blink popped from 50 yards down, then another faint one farther. I could have spent a day chasing them like a gull after a chip bag in wind. Instead, I took photos, marked coordinates, and told the part of me that likes patterns to take a seat. On the road out to the gate, I met a white crew cab idling nose out in a turnout I didn't use. 2 men in uniform stepped out. The patches looked right. The truck did not. We stick a district sticker on the rear window because half our budget is reminding ourselves we exist. Their window had paper taped where this sticker should be, a printed permit, small font, too much legalese for a windshield. The driver smiled the way people smile when they've practiced faces. "You logged a relay?" he asked, like we were in the middle of a conversation I'd forgotten. "Bagged it," I said. His partner nodded toward the ridge. "We've got a sweep scheduled," he said. "You can drop it with us." "I'll run it to HQ," I said, and felt my ribs remember how to be a fence. The driver's smile didn't move. That works. Back on the ridge, the radio caught an actual human word from dispatch. Copy. I told them the truck description. They told me no sweep was on the calendar, and if anyone wanted my bag, they could come with a signature I recognized at the second night the blinks moved. Not random shifted down and left, as if the conversation had taken a walk. I stood on the overlook with the headlamp off and timed the pulses until the numbers fell into a pattern. I could draw without looking. Blink. 24 count. Blink. 24. Long pause at 2 minutes. Blink. A small shop project, the kind people build after watching videos that confuse hobby with job. I pushed the fence rail with my palm and felt a small give where last season it had none. 4 bolts had fresh tool scars without our red paint stripes. The rail wasn't unsafe. It was staged to feel unsafe on first lean. If you were nervous, you'd back away from the drop and toward the predator that prefers parking lots. At 2 o'clock. A sharp metal ping ran from the tower above, like a socket biting, then releasing. I climbed the ladder slow, each rung its own mind, and peered into the glass box. Nothing disturbed but that dust. On the north window, though, a smear. The faint arc a gloved finger makes when it drags along frost to write and then erases. I breathed on the glass. The smear spelled nothing I could read, just a curve with purpose. I left it. There's a kind of curiosity that gets you hired and a kind that gets you cited on a plaque. Loved by people you don't know. Dawn brought a Ranger truck. I did recognize blue coffee mug on the dash. Dent on the rear quarter from the time the plow forgot to be humble. My supervisor stepped out and took the evidence bag, flipping it in his hands like it might confess if jostled. "We'll run the serial on that tube," he said. "If it has one." He asked about the men with paper in the window. I gave details the way you give a plate number when all you really remember is the color. "We'll ask around," he said, which is our way of admitting the forest keeps better records than we do. I stayed through my week. Each night the blink shifted a little, always ending in the same 2-minute pause. Each morning I found a new reflector screwed in at a new height, and each time I backed the screws, checked for holes, logged coordinates, bagged nothing because the holes only came behind the first one. On my last evening I sat on the step with the stove purring and tried to make the pulses into Morse. They weren't. They were just a metronome for someone else's patience. On the way down for good, an empty flatbed passed me going up. No markings, driver with careful hair, temporary tag on the back window. He lifted his fingers off the wheel in a hello that was really a measurement. At the highway, the radio carried a clear sentence for once. North Ridge relay audit complete. No call sign. No reply. I turned the volume down and let the truck be louder than the world. Still think about those barefoot-looking prints in frost, the kind thin shoes leave when you value quiet over toes. If you go to Cold River, overlook this fall and see a reflector that looks too new to have survived a winter. Take a photo and then trust the dirt instead. And if a person with the right patch asks for your bag without the right signature, hand them a pencil and ask them to write their name how their mother would. If they can't, the Ridge doesn't need their help. The construction company called the job night presence, which is different from security in the exact way you're thinking. Be visible. Write things down. Don't go looking for trouble your insurance can't explain. They were raising a bypass bridge over the river west of town. A 3-span concrete job with a staging yard fenced in by chain link and goodwill. Thieves had hit 2 sites the month before for copper and tool batteries. They wanted a body in a reflective vest who made would-be shoppers feel watched. The guard shack was a prefab with a space heater that complained but delivered. Floodlights painted the yard the color of old bones. I signed in at 21:50 on a Saturday and walked the inside of the fence once. The routine I used to memorize where my footprints belong. Coils of wire sat on pallets like cinnamon rolls for giants. A diesel Jenny hummed under a fiberglass shroud. Happy as an appliance. At 037, the floodlight nearest the gate fluttered and went dark. Not dramatic, just a blink and a sigh. I checked the breaker fine. The bulb was warm to the touch. I wrote it down and told the heater to be braver. At 103, music started somewhere past the bridge of Buckman Thin. Tinny, 10 seconds of melody I couldn't place, looping like a brainworm with ambition. I stepped up onto the approach and listened. The melody wasn't quite melody. 3 short notes, 2 longer ones, a pause, repeat. My granddad would have said Morse. But my granddad loved being right, even when he WASN single quotes T. Back in the shack, I held the handheld radio and called the project managers after hours. Number, voicemail. I shifted to the counties. Non-emergency line and asked the dispatcher if any surveyors were scheduled to finger paint the night with tech. Not on my sheet, she said. You got company? I told her maybe. She said they'd have a unit cruise the frontage road within the hour, which means at some point before sunrise when the paper load thins. At 140, I did my second fence walk. Near the generator, the air had a warm glue smell, epoxy or fresh tape. I circled slow. The Jenny sounded even. Behind it, tucked under the shroud lip, a small rectangle of electronics was taped to the housing. Coin cell, LED, pea-sized PCB, a poor man's beacon. It blinked the same pattern as the music. Someone had glued timing into my yard. I pocketed it and felt my rulebook wrinkle. Presence, not security. Observe, don't engage. But silence in a place full of expensive things is a magnet for bad ideas. I clicked the shack lights off and watched from the dark. At 2:08. A figure walked into the floodlight's edge near the gate, stopped in the bright square like an actor finding Mark, and turned toward the Jenny. Reflective vest, hard hat, clipboard, the whole kindergarten play. Evening, I called, stepping far enough forward that my vest answered his vest. He lifted a hand in a just another employee wave. Audit, he said. His voice had that practiced flat of people who know sounding like a person is riskier than sounding like a role. What company? I asked. He tapped the clipboard like it contained the answer and did not move closer. The floodlights made his face into geometry: chin, nose, the absence where eyes should be. You forgot your sign out, he said. We don't sign out, I said, which was true and unhelpful. He nodded like the truth, and his script could share a table, and then turned as if to leave. I walked along the fence to parallel him outside the line. His boots made the crunch that dust makes when it wants to be snow. At the corner, he paused and glanced up at the dead floodlight. You'll want to fix that, he said, almost kindly. Monday, I said. Monday, he agreed. And stepped into the dark. I stood there listening to the generators, indifferent. Purr until the heater's complaint sounded like companionship. At 3:10, the radio burped static and the thin echo of my own voice from earlier. You got company? The dispatcher's line mangled like it had been recorded badly and played through a can. I lifted the mic and said nothing because something about being heard. Wrong makes you stingy. The cruiser did roll by at 3:50, a quiet constellation of blue on the road. The deputy made eye contact long enough to check the box that says a person exists, and moved on. Nothing to see is a thing you still have to see. At 4:22, the floodlight revived by itself and burned steady. When I checked it at dawn, the electrician's panel was still shut, but the fixture's cover screws bore fresh dings like someone had let a driver slip. I popped the lens. Taped inside was a twin to the little beacon I'd pocketed on the Jenny. Only this one had 2 extra pads soldered, a receiver of some sort. I took a photo and brought it to the day foreman when he showed up with coffee and apology for the hour. He stared, not pretending to understand. Kids? He suggested, the universal adult shrug. Kids who keep inventory, I said, and told him about the vest and the script. He laughed because the alternative is buying locks and telling his crew to sign them. And nobody wants that on a Sunday. He sent their electrician up in a bucket to check the rest of the fixtures. 2 more had tape residue or something small had lived under the lens, smooth rectangles cleaner than the dust around them. On the backside of one pole, someone had marked a tiny X in green painter's tape at ankle height, the way you'd mark which ones to hit after dark. You don't always catch thieves doing theft, but you learn to recognize rehearsal. I took Sunday night too, because routine settle nervous system and schedule drives off people who prefer surprise. At 0:51, the music came again from past the abutment. I walked the approach and stood by the guardrail where the new span yawns over rebar and air. The sound wasn't coming from below. It was coming from the tree line across the road, inside a cluster of saplings where sap makes the night smell like a shop class. I didn't cross. I listened until the pattern wore a groove in my ear, then went back and wrote the count. 3 shorts, 2 longs, 40 seconds between repeats. If it was Morse SSS, OO, a pause so long it made the OOs feel lonely. An SOS with an allergy to attention. At 1:30, the vest man returned without the vest. Same height, same clipboard, now just a jacket and a hat you buy in bulk. He walked the outside of the fence, stopping at each pole with tape residue like he was paying respects. I stood inside with my light off and my hand on the radio. When he reached the corner near the Jenny, the light at the far end of the yard pulsed 3 times in sympathy with nothing I could account for. He looked up at it and then at me and smiled in the way people smile when a trick lands for a child. He kept walking and did not look back again. Dawn makes yards honest. The foreman arrived with 2 guys whose jackets smelled like Sunday breakfast. We walked the fence together. Under the abutment, in the shadow where bits of wire and plastic go to pretend they're not trash, lay a handful of adhesive QR stickers, weathered, corners lifting. I scanned one anyway. Dead domain, no redirect. But my phone's log later showed a handshake, the way 2 strangers brush shoulders, and both pretend to be looking at the same shelf. Inventory. The company added a second lock to the gate and told me I'd done well by doing almost nothing, which is corporate for thanks. I drove home past the new span listening to the radio bleed local morning show into static where the river bends. For 10 seconds, the host's laugh clipped into 3 short, 2 long, and I felt silly and then not. I turned the volume down, watched the guardrail glint, and tried to remember whether my job was to be present or to be witness. I've decided there's a third thing: to be boring in ways that disappoint people who bring schedules to other people's property. If you ever pull a night at a site like that, learn the yard's paragraph breaks, the poles that hum, the corner that breeds wind. Tape your own tiny X's in your head on the places that already belong, so you can see the ones that don't. And when a voice at the fence tells you you've forgotten to sign out, look at your own clipboard and say, "We don't." If the voice keeps insisting, let it. Paper can't turn your gate for them. Neither can your curiosity. The week after the flood, when the park reopened lower trails at your own risk, I volunteered to run signage on the Birch Hollow Loop. It's the kind of job nobody fights for: hauling a drill, a pouch of bolts, and a pack of plastic diamonds that make lost people feel found. I started late too, because the road crew had the access lane down to one direction at a time, and the flagger liked conversation. Dusk was already puddling in the gullies when I shouldered out of the truck. Birch Hollow is a slot more than a trail, a cool crease in the earth where sound gets taller and the air smells like wet coins. Meltwater had sawn a new path down the middle. The old footbridge leaned at a weird angle, its stringers half debarked by debris. I made a note to close it officially, then stepped onto the only option. A single plank lashed across a cluster of boulders like a dare. The plank flexed, barked, settled. I crossed, counting without meaning to 1, 2, 3, 4 because numbers make my legs less stupid. On the far bank, a small metal tag winked from a sapling. Not ours. Ours are plastic, stamped with a code that makes sense to the office but not to the woods. This tag was thin stainless, etched, Zone 5. It was screwed in at an odd height knee level, as if the audience was smaller than me or more cautious. I took a photo, left it in place, and kept going. The flood had planed the trail smooth, erasing last season's stories. Every so often, though, I'd see a shape the water hadn't invented. Footprints that weren't footprints, so much as scuffs repeating the same mistake. Narrow shoe, outside edge heavy, toe worn to an arrowhead. A runner who'd rolled an ankle once and never learned to love it again. The print ran true through every patch that would take it. Like a signature practiced on bad paper. At the gorge midpoint, I stopped on a slab to eat. Headlamp off to save batteries and to let the hollow's light, such as it was, be enough. That was when I heard the counting. Male voices, low and patient, coming from upstream where the spill narrows. 5, 6, 7, not a cadence. A ledger. I called out name, agency, coming through, so I wouldn't walk up on somebody's bad evening. The voices stopped clean. After a beat, another voice answered from behind me, closer than felt fair. 8. I turned with the headlamp still off and let my eyes find shapes. The reply had been too neat, no breath on it, no tremble from cold or hurry. I switched the light on low and swept the rocks. On the downstream side, tucked under a root, a small box the size of a deck of cards blinked a red LED once and then went dead like it hadn't meant to be seen. Adhesive residue patterned its back. A thin wire led to a photoresistor poked out toward the creek. A timing toy triggered by ambient changes, counting something that wasn't me. I bagged it because that's what the notebook tells you to do when your gut wants to throw things. Crossing the narrow span again, the headlamp flickered. The creek water below reflected another beam that wasn't my own, moving slow from down valley, panning like someone practicing steady hands. It found me, flared white into my lens, and my lamp blew to 0. I froze mid-plank and finished the rest by counting out loud 5 steps, heel to toe, a ritual that felt childish and worked anyway. On the far post, new prints overlay mine, same size, same tread, reversed. I hadn't heard anyone cross. The plank would have said something if a deer did it. The air around the post felt cool, the way shade feels even when there isn't any. In the snow softened by flood spray, a strip of glossy red ribbon lay stapled to a twig, single staple. New, the kind you buy in sleeves with a date printed on the box. It wasn't tied. Tying takes fingers and time. Stapling takes patience and a plan. I made the decision then that you make alone. I turned back. There's a difference between finishing a loop and writing down a thing honestly. On the way out, a second stainless tag blinked from a birch, this one etched Audit 5. Not zone. I photographed, logged coordinates, left it, and gained ground with the kind of silence you earn. At the trailhead, my truck's dome light glowed like a bad idea. The door was still locked. I keep the habit. On the seat sat a folded survey printout of the hollow grid squares labeled by hand, contour lines traced heavier than the printer made them. Across the top, neat block letters in pencil. Count complete. Proceed east. Same handwriting I'd seen in other places. On other nights, the kind that uses rulers in schools old enough to teach penmanship. I didn't call it in right away. First I pulled the hood and checked the battery. The terminals were tight. Then I took photos, bagged the printout, and drove to the ranger station with my shoulders up around my ears. In the morning, the district sent me back with a second ranger and a maintenance tech to close the plank and evaluate a real fix. The bridge was gone. Not collapse gone. Ropes unraveled, laid in loops, stringers dragged into the brush and leaned like firewood. Planks stacked 3 deep on a ledge above high water line. Whatever had been done quietly and by hands practiced with tools, not teeth. On the upriver rock where I'd seen the first stainless tag, a second one had been screwed right above it. The top one read Relay 5. We pulled those and sent them to regional with a note that tasted like embarrassment. The tech scraped the staple from the twig and pocketed it with fingers that didn't want to learn this new chore. He's the kind of man who likes fixing, not thinking about who unfixes after hours. We rebuilt a safer crossing a week later. New stringers, a center brace, bolts countersunk where hands wouldn't find them. Planks deck screwed until the sound they made was the sound I wanted to trust. At the kiosk, a laminated of 4 appeared the morning after we reopened. Safety audit, please list group size, equipment on hand, and estimated return. Good font, wrong logo. I pulled it while it was still wet at the corners, and the staples made that small complaining pop. A day later, another copy was taped inside a plastic map sleeve, out of reach unless you unlatch the case. Someone had a key or had practiced this latch until they could do it. With a piece of metal and stubbornness, here's the part I don't know what to do with. 3 nights after we set the new bridge, a whistle blew from the hollow at exactly 23 o'clock, 3 neat bursts, each as clean as a recording. I answered with 1 long, 1 short. Then did the thing the memo tells everyone to do now. Describe your location, water, slope, trees. The reply came 1 beat later from further down valley. Over here. Same voice, same distance, wrong lungs. I stood at the trailhead until midnight with my light off and my palm on the hood of the truck, letting the dome go dark and the engine tick cool. When I finally left, the survey copy I'd turned in at the office felt like a weight missing from my passenger seat. I still walk Birch Hollow because that's the contract I have with this place. The new bridge hums a little when big water goes under. There's comfort in honest noise. I've learned to speak out loud when something calls without breath. Tell me your water. Tell me your slope. Tell me your trees. If the answer is a sentence that would look tidy on a clipboard, I keep my feet where 1,000 feet taught the ground how to be ground. And I count only to 4 when I cross, because stopping at 8 feels like taking attendance for someone else. I took night call for a towing outfit one winter because it paid what the mill wouldn't and kept me honest. The pass east of town has 100 places a car can give up on itself in February, and a dozen more where a driver decides the map knows a shortcut. We had a battered wrecker with a winch that sang like an old man clearing his throat in chains heavy enough to turn prayer into friction. Snow started around 9. By 11, it had learned to mean it. I was halfway through coffee at the lay-by when dispatch cracked into my cab with an address that didn't sound like an address. Mile 62. Marker 14 to the second pullout. Vehicle stalled. Caller's phone died mid-sentence. Happens. People's batteries die exactly when they need to ask for mercy. The pass road was a tunnel of powder and headlights. I crawled, let the chains bite, passed the first pullout clean, and found the second by math more than sight. A sedan sat nose in, hazards on, trunk cracked to the safety latch so the snow wouldn't weld it shut. That's a trick you learn from someone else's unhappiness. I set the brake, stepped out into snow that makes the world a room, and called out the way you do when you don't want to surprise anyone with a chain. Tow. I said, "You called?" No answer. Up close, the sedan's driver's seat was empty, passenger seat empty, back seat. A shadow that might have been a blanket or night standing still. I circled. On the passenger side, a flare lay half buried, unlit, still taped together in its plastic wrapper. Another flare had been burned and stuck tail down in a snowbank, its last inch a glowing coal under the crust. Flares say hurry, even when they've given up. I checked the hood. Warm, not hot. Somebody had been here recently. The driver's window was down an inch. the kind of inch that keeps glass from freezing to rubber. On the dash, a folded note glowed in my flashlight. Went to get help. Back soon. Pencil, block letters neat. I've seen the same letters on laminated audits stuck to trail signs 50 miles from asphalt. The neatness mattered more than the words. I keyed my mic. Dispatch answered with a quiet that sounds like work. I told them I had an empty vehicle, likely driver on foot, and that I'd hook quick and nose the car out to the plow line. As I pulled the cable, a light panned across the snow beyond the pull-out slow, steady, not a headlamp bob. It paused on my rear door, held, then slithered off into trees that had no business being there. The beam was too thin for a truck, too mean for a phone. Drone, or someone practicing looked like a drone. I hooked the sedan's front eye and took up slack until the line hummed. The trunk lifted with the nose and gaped. Inside, a neat row of road triangles, still folded, the bright fabric unkissed by grime. Beside them, a sealed bag of reflective stickers and a roll of green painter's tape. I closed the trunk without taking inventory. My conscience couldn't reconcile. Boot prints led away, from the car to the snow berm, then downhill 2 sets. One lighter, hurried, the heel cutting harder than the toe. One broader, weight on the outside edge again, like the same ghost I find everywhere. Learned how to walk wrong once and kept it. The prints paralleled the road a dozen yards, then rejoined at a tree where the bark, lower than knee, had a fresh scuff. The scuff was green with tape adhesive. Someone had marked the tree and then decided not to leave the mark. I dragged the sedan to the shoulder and climbed into the cab. Over the radio, the state trooper's unit chimed in. He was 10 minutes out, depending on luck. He asked if I had eyes on the driver. I said no. He told me to sit tight in the wrecker and lock the doors. I did, because some nights you let other people's training pay your mortgage. Through the windshield, a triangle appeared in the snow 40 feet ahead, one of the folding ones from the trunk. It hadn't been there a minute ago. Its reflector panel glowed against the storm, pointing backward toward my hood like it had an opinion about my life choices. A second triangle appeared on the other side of the lane, symmetrical, like parentheses around a sentence I hadn't said. I didn't see the hands that did it. Just the weather moving and the road learning new punctuation. Unit 24. I've got staged triangles, I said, then added, no person. The trooper said he was cresting the hill. His lights washed color through the snow, heavy and slow. A man stepped out from the tree line with his hands up like he'd practiced. No hat, jacket zipped wrong, the exhausted face of someone selling a story cheap. Car died, he said. Phone died. Thank God, you guys are fast. The trooper did the questions with patience. License, whose car? Where from, where to? Everything normal enough until where to. When the man's mouth sorted options and settled on a town I'd driven past to get here. Why past the summit in a storm? The trooper asked, gentle as a dentist. Shortcut, the man said, and knew he'd lost the point. We towed the sedan back down the hill to a turnout with a camera and a plow berm, high enough to stop a truck that forgot physics. The driver rode in the trooper's SUV. On the way down I kept replaying those triangles. When we idled side by side at the turnout, I asked the trooper if he'd set them. He shook his head. Was going to ask you the same. The next morning the snowplow crew chief called my boss. Said they found a little adhesive LED stuck under the bridge rail, just below that pullout, a coin cell taped to a blinking square, aimed at windshield height. On the guardrail post nearby, a QR sticker with a dead domain. Kids, the chief said. Or not kids. I worked the past 2 more weeks. Every third night I'd see the faint bob of a light halfway up a side road that isn't named. A week after that, a different tow driver took a call in the same pullout. Same model sedan, different color, trunk popped to the safety latch, triangles in the snow set like a lesson. He unhooked before the trooper got there. Later he told me it felt like we were moving props between scenes, not helping people. I'm not saying the guy that night wasn't cold and stuck and grateful. Some people are exactly what they say they are, unlucky. But somebody else is practicing choreography on that hill markers, beacons, a schedule you could check against the weather app. If you tow at night, put your triangles where the manual says and leave other people's in their trunk. If a note on a dashboard says, "Back soon," in perfect block letters, check whether the windshield frost melted around the note or the note melted around the frost. One of those says hurry. The other says you're already late to somebody else's. Show. The district calls North Loon Arm. Primitive, which is bureaucrat for bring your own sense. 6. Tent pads carved into a ridge above the reservoir. A bare box with a cranky latch, no water except what ripples below you. And a pit toilet that has seen things. After Labor Day, it empties out too cold at night, too dark by dinner. I took evening patrols in September because the lake wears the last light like it remembers summer and because trouble follows empty places like a stray dog follows a lunch truck. The first week was nothing. Raccoons testing the bear box, a couple trying to make a fire out of damp philosophy. A kayak on a truck with straps that thought gravity was a rumor. On the second Thursday, I pulled into the gravel turn and saw a perfect camp at Site 310 pitched square with the door facing the water. Tarp guide to textbook angles, cooler centered on a stump like a catalog photo. No footprints between the water and the pad. I've learned to distrust neat. I climbed the spur and called out, "Ranger, anyone home?" Silence, then the lake's tiny voice. I lifted the cooler lid empty, clean, no melt ring. Inside the tent, no pad, no bag. A plastic shelf unit with 3 battery bricks and a USB hub you could charge 8 cameras on. A thin cable ran from the hub through a grommet to a bush by the ridge. In the bush, a trail cam in a metal box, infrared. Lens pointed not at the deer path but at the access spur where boots appear. Back at the post, there was a laminated sheet under the map. Survey please list party size. Permits and gear on hand. A QR code sat in the corner. I scanned it with the phone I keep clean of my real life. Dead link. Still, my log later showed a handshake with a site name that wasn't a site. Like someone waving from a crowded room and not staying long enough to be introduced. After dusk. From the cove beyond Site 5, a drone rose small, fast. The kind with a heartbeat flash and no sense of modesty. It hovered over the water and then drifted to take my truck's plate. I waved like a dad at a little league game. It didn't wave back. 10 minutes later, a sedan idled on the service road with its lights off. Only the dome on, a person inside writing or pretending to write. I did a loop and let them see I saw them. They left before the lake ran out of silver. We don't yank cams outright unless they're baited or aimed at bathrooms. We photograph, log, and ask county to take the weight if there's a case. I called it in. The dispatcher said, "We had the same model at River Bend last month. Aimed at the boat ramp. Pulled a dozen plates in an evening." She sounded tired in that way that means she cares. At 23:10. When I just about convinced myself to go home, a whistle sounded from the far shore, 3 short bursts, then a voice. Friendly and neat, "Hey, over here." The sound carried like it sat in a pocket the lake made. I answered like training says, 1 long, 1 short, then asked for water, slope, trees. The voice said, "Over here," same tone, same distance, then stopped. I could have boated across in 10 minutes. I didn't. I walked the access road instead and met the sedan again at the junction, now parked with the trunk cracked and no one in the front. The dome light glowed on a clipboard and 3 bright triangles still folded and clean. I didn't open the door. I kept walking, 2 days later, a father and son camped at Site 2 reported finding a fee sheet taped to their cooler. It asked them to list electronics currently at site and anticipated time to leave. The dad, bless him, brought it down to the kiosk and waited for me like I was a manager at a return counter. He said, "We filled it out and then realized that was dumb." I said, "Happens," and took the page. At the bottom, tiny block letters, Audit 3, North Arm. We moved the post camera to face the road. That night it caught a tan sedan doing a careful figure 8 in the lot, stopping nose to nose with 3 cars in sequence for the kind of pause that would let an automated reader try. Our camera doesn't read, it just watches. Sometimes that's a better posture. At midnight, I walked back up to Site 3 with County. The camp still sat catalog perfect. The hub in the tent blinked a slow charge cycle patient. On the stump, a small pocket speaker had been placed face down. The deputy lifted it with 2 fingers. A red LED pulsed once and died. Bluetooth bait, waiting to be asked for a name by phones whose owners don't know to say, "Forget." We bagged it, then killed the cam, logged the hub, left the tent. On the way down, the deputy said, "Quiet, inventory, not robbery." Until it is. A week later, the club that maintains the nearby campsite texted the district. Group chat. Glossy "No Open Fire" signs had sprouted overnight along the ridge. The font was right. The icon wasn't. In the corner of each sign, a sticker with a QR, saying dead link. If you scanned it, my burner phone log said, you'd made eye contact with a handshake and then both kept walking like strangers who'd maybe met somewhere. We did the boring work. Pulled the signs. Took down the tent and left a plain warning. Unauthorized equipment removed, contact ranger station. Nobody contacted us. Unless you count a strongly worded email from a free account calling us anti-tech. If technology's your religion, fine. Leave the congregation out of my lot. Now, when I do Lunarm in September, I idle at the turn until my eyes remember how the dark should look. If a perfect camp's already set for you, no footprints, cooler too clean, assume it's a camera with laundry. If a whistle across water says, "Over here," ask it questions a person can answer and a recording can't. And if a sedan sits with its trunk cracked in triangles, still folded on the seat, wave like you would at a neighbor you don't owe sugar to. Take a photo of your own plate before they do. Later, when someone asks whether it's safe out there, tell them yes in the way the lake means it. Safe as long as the person making the schedule is you. The county closes the skyline road every November when the drifts start pretending to be permanent. But gates don't keep out people who only need 1 more mile. I was on last check duty, tag the culverts, log the kiosks, make sure nobody had moved the barriers to suit their optimism. It was the kind of day that looks colder than it is. Sun punching through and making the snowfields sparkle like the woods were sorry for everything else they'd done. The upper turnaround is just a paved oval carved into the trees. Plow operators love it because they can swing a wide loop without backing. When I got there, 3 traffic cones stood in a perfect triangle across the asphalt, reflective bands pristine like they'd never met a bumper. We don't put cones on skyline. If we close a road, we drag a steel gate across and bolt it like a promise. I idled past the cones and parked by the kiosk. A laminated sheet was taped inside. The display case, "Winter Safety Audit, please list occupants." Vehicle type, equipment on hand. Same font I've been pulling off coolers and campground posts all year. A QR code sat in the corner, the kind of square that invites phones to do tricks. I photographed it and left it. Fresh tracks led past the gate, 1 set of narrow snowshoes with a short stride. 1 boot pair with that same familiar outside edge roll I've been following for months. They hugged the plow berm like people who want to be found later, but not right now. 100 yards up, a little orange flag fluttered from a sapling at knee height. It wasn't our flagging. Ours is sun-faded, torn, tied by cold hands. This ribbon was glossy and stapled, not knotted. I followed the boot prints a while, just enough to put the day into my legs, and then cut into the trees where the old overlook spur still remembers being a road. The overlook platform was clear of drift, a neat rectangle broomed down to wood. On the rail, someone had bolted a small aluminum tag, Relay 11 North. Behind it, a tiny hole drilled clean to the rail's post. I pried the tag up with my multi-tool and fished a pencil-thin tube out of the hole heat shrink. A whisper of wire, the faint chemical breath of solder. I bagged it. The tube wore a strip of masking tape under the shrink with a date from 2 weeks ago and the initials NR. Whoever they are. They're proud enough to sign it. When I turned to leave, my radio spoke in my own voice. Bagged it, then static. The repeater up here is cranky in weather like this. But hearing your words played back half a second late will make you look over your shoulder at nothing and then laugh at yourself with all your teeth showing. Back at the gate, the cones had moved. 2 now stood shoulder-width apart facing my bumper. The 3rd waited 20 yards behind my truck, a bright little exclamation point that hadn't existed a minute ago. Nobody on the road. No engine sounds. I walked a circle big enough to make the show stop being charming. In the snow by the kiosk, shoe prints overlapped my narrow treads, stepping exactly into my steps like someone rehearsing a dance they don't want to own. The laminated audit sheet was gone. In its place, a single index card, pencil block letters neat as a ruler, count complete, proceed west. I called the sheriff's office because that's the rule when cones move themselves. A deputy rolled up 30 minutes later with coffee steam curling from a mug and a look that said he'd been up all night for other people's problems. He listened, nodded, photographed the cones, and then asked if he could see the tube. I handed over the bag. He rotated it like a jeweler. Same guts as the ones on the lake last month, he said. They're cheap timing beacons. When you shine light, they whisper to each other. You can triangulate with a phone and pretend you're clever. We walked the oval while he talked to his shoulder mic. The snowshoes had come back down the road and then cut into the trees, looping the turnaround like a bored animal. At the far edge of the lot, where plows throw winter into a tidy ridge, a little adhesive LED blinked under the lip every 24 seconds. He peeled it off with a pocket knife and stuck it to the top of his cruiser. We'll let them call me for a change, he said, and smiled the tired smile you only get by mid-December. I locked the gate again and drove down. Halfway to the main highway, a sedan sat angled into a turnout, trunk cracked to the safety latch. The dome light glowed on a clipboard and 3 folded triangles. Nobody in the front seat. I pulled behind and walked up the shoulder so my boots would sing on gravel if anyone popped up pretending not to be afraid. The trunk shut itself when I got near. The car idled quiet as a cat. I kept walking until the road bent and then turned back. By the time I reached my truck, the sedan had gone, leaving 2 neat tire tracks and nothing to apologize for. 2 days later, the plow crew found cones again, this time set across a private drive half a mile below the gate. The homeowner called the district and asked if we were auditing snow. We weren't. We never are. You'd think people would stop filling out those safety sheets. But when winter presses on your chest and the woods look like a plan you don't remember making, paperwork feels like an adult in the room. I still run Skyline when the weather threatens. Now I kick every cone I see, gently, like I'm checking if it's hollow or alive. If a reflector blinks at me from an overlook, I photograph it and leave it in the bag until I'm in an office with people who like hardware. If the radio repeats my last sentence like a nervous parrot, I stop talking and let the trees have the conversation. And if I find a note under my wiper that says where I should proceed, I proceed the other way first to see who's disappointed. Took the graveyard shift at the Waterfield treatment plant because it pays better than sleeping, and I don't mind listening to machines breathe. The facility sits back in the timber at the end of a cracked road that used to be a county priority and now isn't. You get 2 long settling basins, a filtration building that hums like it's praying, and a small admin office where a single guard drinks bad coffee and learns the chorus to every creek frog in 3 counties. There's a fence, cameras, and signs that say nitrogen monoxide trespass in fonts that make lawyers sleep well. But fences keep honest people honest. The rest of them learn which corners sag and which doors have hinges that look like they came from a catalog. You can still order from. My first week was uneventful. I walked the perimeter at 10 after every hour, logged the pumps, reset a stubborn breaker that thinks 2:30 is a good time to test me. On night 8, the south camera pinged motion, 3 seconds of nothing, then a shimmer at fence height, then nothing again. I took the long way around with my flashlight hooded. The grass outside the fence were the kind of scuff 4 feet make when 2 people change their minds at the same time. On the inside, a tent stake had been pushed into gravel at knee height, monofilament and stretched across the gap to 3 bottle caps taped under the generator shed door. If you opened the door without looking, you'd sing a little song for anyone within 100 yards. I cut the line and pocketed the caps. It's petty, but so am I sometimes. At 1:14, the lights in the filter hall went out. Not all of them, just the first row, like a breath held. The camera inside flickered to snow for 6 minutes, and then came back with everything exactly where I hadn't left it. On the control desk, a clipboard I keep exactly square had nudged an inch toward the door. Paper in the dark makes more noise in your head than feet do on concrete. I checked the breakers. The panel cover sat unscrewed against the wall, fasteners lined up on the floor like someone hawking a tidy morality lesson. Next to breaker 5, someone had etched a tiny X. 5 feeds the camera strip along the south wall. I screwed the cover back on and told myself I was auditioning to be a character in someone else's story, only if I let myself be. Outside, a red dot skittered along the fence for 2 seconds and died. Laser pointer not a sight. The wobble gives those away. I killed my light and listened. The settling basins make a low, throat-deep sound you stop hearing until something edits it. When the dot reappeared, it hit the nitrogen monoxide trespass sign, wiggled like a joke, then slid to the hinge bolts and held there for a beat as if the wall itself was answering a test. I called county. The dispatcher said, "Nearest unit is 20 minutes if the bridge isn't glossy." I told her to let them take 20-2. At 2:03, the intercom hissed to life. "You're early tonight," a voice said. Ordinary and male and irritating the way a recorded voice is because it never grants you breath. I ignored it until ignoring felt rude to myself. "Who is this?" I said, static, then my own "who is this?" Back at me, a half beat later, distorted. I turned the volume down and put my palm on the desk to make sure it was still wood and not some other material. I couldn't name. The cruiser's approach thumped through the graded bridge over the plant outfall. The deputy parked outside the gate, lit up the ditch with a spotlight, and sat with one hand on the wheel like a person who has learned the job is mostly waiting for people to volunteer who they are. 2 silhouettes lifted out of the tree line behind him, hands up, a performance as old as lights and uniforms. Both wore vests. Both had clipboards. Contractors, one called before the window rolled all the way down. The deputy didn't get out. He asked names, who hired them, where their badges were. Their answers had the right nouns and the wrong music. After 2 minutes, the scene ended the way these scenes always do. "You need to leave now," and of course, "Officer," and a pair of backs that tried not to look like rehearsals walking away toward a car I never heard start. We found 2 more bottle cap chimes along the fence that night, and a small Bluetooth speaker tucked behind the emergency shower, face down and blinking a tiny red light. The deputy bagged it and said, "These are turning up at docks and substations. They don't do much on their own. They just sit and see who wants to talk to them." He told me not to engage if the intercom grew opinions again. I told him I preferred not to have conversations with my own voice anyway. 2 nights later, the floodlights along the access road began to pulse one by one, every 24 seconds, as if answering a question. The electrician found a coin cell LED taped inside 3 fixtures, right behind the lenses. We pulled them and left the tape residue because sometimes mess is a louder sentence than cleanliness. On my last shift of the month, I sat in the office with the lights off and the window open a crack so the plant's breathing could remind me the world is boring more often than not. At 1:14, the south wall went dark for 6 minutes. When it came back, the clipboard on the desk had a new line under my 030 notes, written in block letters neat enough to be a font. Audit complete. Proceed south. I left it there. The next morning, the day crew laughed about it until the foreman saw my face and said, "Okay, we'll keep it with the camera pulls. If you ever find yourself guarding a humming box in a stand of dark trees, bring a screwdriver, a thermos, and the kind of patience that respects a fence enough not to narrate at it. Tape isn't magic. Beacons aren't plans. And if the night tries to convince you you're late to a schedule you didn't agree to, check your own watch first. If you're early, let the dark be bored of you." I rented the creek cabin because it was cheaper than town and because the landlord didn't ask questions beyond cash or check. It sat a mile off the county road behind a gate that never quite closed and a meadow that switched from grass to ice without telling you. The creek ran shoulder deep in spring and ankle deep by July. In November it made a sound like a zipper. You couldn't see. The previous tenant had left behind a stack of split wood and a note. "Pump hates air. Stroke it slow." The hand pump on the sink did indeed hate air. The stove liked hot impatience. The stovepipe hated any. I learned the cabin the way you learn someone else's dog, slowly, with bribes. First week, nothing but deer and the far-off cough of a truck on the county road. Second week, the neighbor up the ridge rolled a generator into his shed and let it bark from dusk to midnight. On still nights, his exhaust drifted down and made my stove's draft sulk. I met him twice at the mailboxes. Quiet man, careful hair, boots too clean for the road he drove. He carried packages with both hands like one might explode. He waved the minimum amount for civility and asked if I got good service this far out. I said sometimes. He said he liked quiet. We both lied a little. The third week, small reflectors appeared along the cabin trail, little squares screwed to saplings at waist height, angled like road cats' eyes. I figured hunters, then changed my mind when I found one screwed to the corner of my porch, low, as if it wanted to watch boots. Behind it, a pencil hole drilled into the wood. The hole had the smell of new cuts. I got the multi-tool, pulled the reflector, and fished out a tiny tube, heat shrink neat as a hobby kit. A bit of tape under the shrink said Relay 12 Creek. I bagged it and put the reflector back. No point telling someone I see you when you can say it later with a report. That night, a whistle blew from the meadow, 3 short bursts. I answered with one long, one short because my mouth works before I've decided how brave I am. "Describe your water," I said out loud to nobody. The reply was the same 3 pulses, same timing, same exact pitch. Not a lung. I put more wood in the stove and learned what the inside of my jaw tastes like when you hold it too tight. At midnight, a drone floated down the meadow like a bad idea pretending to be a toy. It hovered above the porch, rotated, took my truck's plate with its little bored eye, and then nosed toward the neighbor's shed. I killed my porch light. The drone wobbled and settled on the shed roof like a sparrow that doesn't understand thermals. The generator died 15 minutes later. Silence works like a drug out here. The first hit makes you hear louder. I walked up the next day with a pie as an excuse, because small places still pretend food is a language. He didn't open the door all the way. Behind him I could see a folding chair, a card table, and a wall with pegboard hooks arranged in a grid. The generator sat in the corner with a new cable coiled on its handle like a snake that had made a decision. He took the pie with both hands and said, "Audit the creek much?" The sentence amused him more than it did me. I said, "I just rent." He nodded like that was either an answer or a test I just failed. 2 mornings later, a laminated safety check sheet flapped on my porch rail. It asked for occupants, gear on hand, anticipated departure. I threw it in the stove and watched it curl into that special black ash laminate does when it refuses to be useful. That night, the porch reflector I'd put back blinked once and then went quiet. In the creek, a soft light pulsed every 24 seconds. A heartbeat from under a log I didn't remember floating there yesterday. I moved my truck to the far side of the meadow and parked it, nose out under the cottonwoods where the plate couldn't see the road. The next day, fresh tire tracks looped the gate, 3 slow circles like someone was teaching the mud a word. The box at the end of the drive where we leave packages had a new strip of green tape on its hinge. It peeled up under my thumb like it had plans for that hinge later. I called the district from town and asked if anyone was running surveys along the creek. The secretary said, "Only the usual fish people." The fish people leave flags, not reflectors. They carry clipboards with soft corners and bad coffee breath and have no interest in my groceries or my truck. I told her I'd send photos. I didn't say of what. That night, the neighbor's shed light came on at 23 o'clock, same as always. The drone rose, buzzed to my porch, hovered over the spot where my plate would have been if I hadn't moved the truck, and then wobbled as if the world had given it a math problem. It drifted back to his roof and landed. In the stillness that followed, a voice came from the meadow. "Over here." Casual, close and wrong. I said to myself and the trees and whoever had chosen this script, "Tell me your water." Silence. "Tell me your slope." Silence. "Tell me your trees." The trees did their job and stayed being trees. I slept badly. At dawn, a note sat under a rock on the porch step. "Count complete, proceed south." Pencil, block letters, patient. I didn't bring it to the landlord or the sheriff. I walked it down to the ranger office and handed it to a person who likes bagging stranger things than notes. On my way back, the neighbor's gate was wide. His shed door stood open. Inside, the pegboard hooks were empty, the generator gone, the folding chair taken. A small square of tape on the wall read "Relay" in tiny letters, nothing else. He'd moved on, or the show had. I still rent the creek cabin because the rent is right and the stove is blunt and honest in a way people aren't. The reflectors stopped multiplying after I started, taking their tubes and leaving the squares. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they found a better creek. If a whistle calls at night now, I don't answer with mine. I answer with questions a recording can't pass. And when a laminated audit shows up on the rail, I feed it to the stove slow so the laminate pops like a tiny applause. The creek keeps zipping the world shut around me, and I let it, because some openings aren't invitations. They're inventory. I signed up to help the volunteer club reopen the Ridge Loop after Winthrop took out half the markers. It's a quiet route most people forget in summer and remember in October, when the maples turn and the air lets you see farther than you should. We split the loop in thirds. I drew the north segment 2 miles of sidehill, 1 creek crossing, and an old ski patrol hut that survives on stubbornness and tin roof patches. I left the truck at the service, gate around 3, and walked in under that thin glassy light that makes your breath feel showy. The first half-mile told the usual story: old blazes buried in lichen, a few downed limbs you can shove with a boot. At the second switchback, a new sign appeared on a young fir. Safety detour gives in clean-rooted letters. The district hasn't made those. Wrong yellow, wrong font. It pointed into a line of brush with the duff swept aside, as if a broom had tried to invent a path. I stuck with the tread I know. Set 2 fresh diamonds at eye height, and wrote the coordinates in the book because the book forgives nothing and later thanks you for it. 100 yards on, the detour reappeared on a different tree, arrow now left. Whoever said it wanted a person to pinball between false mercy and impatience at the ski patrol hut. The door was unlocked, odd but not impossible. Inside, dust and mouse pepper and a space heater that predates my patience. On the table sat a laminated sheet none of us printed. Lost person support, please list name, age, gear, phone, ETA with blank lines and a crisp QR in the corner. I scanned it with my burner. Dead link, but the phone log later showed the handshake you learned to hate, a hello, a shrug, a record that we met even if we didn't talk. On the bench lay a kid's knit hat and a juice box. Full, sweating cold like it had just come out of a convenience store fridge. The hat size said 4 to 6. There were no small prints in the dust. Only mine and a narrow shoe tread that rolled to the outside edge and pivoted at the door, as if the wearer stood there a long time. Listening to the quiet sound like something, I stepped back outside. On the rail, at knee height, a little square reflector had been screwed on since last winter. Behind it a pencil-width hole, clean, smelling faintly of new wood. I pried it and fished out a heat-shrinked tube with 2 wires, short and tidy. Tape under the shrink relay 14, ridge and block letters. I bagged it, took photos, and wrote what I wanted to swear about in neat sentences because neatness is how you fight scripts like this. Dusk took the color out of the world faster than I wanted. The creek crossing had lost its log in the windthrow. A single plank bridged rock to rock with the kind of confidence I never trust on first step. Halfway over, a whistle blew from upstream 3 neat bursts. I answered with 1 long, 1 short, and the script I've taught to people who are scared and to myself when I am. Describe your water. Describe your slope. Tell me your trees. Over here, came the answer. Same distance, same pitch, no breath. I finished the plank by counting to 4, like a child who wants to live, and climbed the bank, where the ground holds boot scuffs like a mirror. 2 sets, 1 light and quick, 1 heavier, that familiar ankle roll signature repeating on cue. They led toward a fresh orange flag, stapled not tied to a sapling, at shin height. Past it, the duff had been swept. I killed my headlamp and let the woods tell me what it wanted. Somewhere downvalley a sedan idled, just enough idle to warm a dome light. A drone heartbeat flashed above the tree line and steadied like a hawk that never learned wind. The hut stood behind me with its perfect little lost child still life and a QR that had already shaken my hand. I backed out, slow. At the service gate, a traffic cone I hadn't seen on the way in now stood in the center like punctuation. Under my wiper, an index card waited. Pencil, tidy blocks, count complete, proceed east. I photographed it. Bagged it and drove the long way out through town so the plate reader camera on Maine could see me twice if it wanted to. Next day, we came as a group, 2 volunteers. A ranger and me. The hat and juice box were gone. The laminated sheet had been replaced with a different version. Safety audit list, group size and gear. With a number in small print at the bottom, 17. The ranger flipped the bench over and found tape residue under the plank where a speaker might ride. Outside, the reflector hole had been filled with a twig and sawdust to look like nothing. The district sent an email. That afternoon, polite language. Stern heart. Do not follow detours that aren't on this week's map. Do not fill out lists you didn't pick up from our office. Do not respond to voices that don't answer details. Half the people who needed to read it didn't. Half did, and then forgot when the day offered them mercy and a shortcut. Now, when I run the ridge loop, I pause at the hut and listen for the particular silence that comes after a recording lands. If a whistle blows, I ask my questions and count the 4 planks across the creek. If an index card tells me which way to proceed, I add a sentence to the book and proceed the other way first, so my feet disappoint whoever brought school supplies into the forest. And I keep a small bag in my pack labeled relays, not because I think I'm going to solve a mystery, but because carrying other people's plans out of the woods feels like paying rent. Last fall I scouted a ridge for deer sign a week before season opened. I hunt for meat and quiet, not antlers, and mostly alone because human conversation sounds wrong after the leaves go gold. The ridge sits 2 miles off the service road, behind a ditch that will swallow a truck whole if you pretend it won't. I crossed on the old culvert and climbed through oak and beech until the ground tipped into those long, gentle benches deer love for their naps. First sign something was off. A mineral lick that wasn't. A square of bare dirt near a game trail looked right at a glance. But the soil was powdered gypsum, fresh, spread too evenly. Above it, a cell camera in a metal box, locked, aimed not at the lick but down the approach line where a human would come from. I circled wide and came in from the deer side, because stubbornness is a kind of camouflage. The box wasn't ours. The district marks theirs with a stenciled number and a contact. This one had a dot of green tape on the hinge and a tiny, neat 12 scratched inside the paint. 100 yards farther, I hit a string of thumbtacks pressed into bark at hip height red. Red, blue, red, just where the trail takes a lazy S through saplings. Not blazes. Markers for someone who understands how tired feet read the woods. I pulled them as I went and pocketed until my fingers were sore from saying no to a geometry someone had practiced at noon. A whistle, 3 quick chirps floated from the hollow. I answered without thinking and regretted the reflex halfway through. Describe your water, I called, because at least I can be consistent. Describe your slope. Tell me your trees. Over here, said the hollow, not caring to talk. I ate jerky and watched a branch sway without wind until the world decided it had done enough theater. On the far bench, in an oak scarred by lightning 30 years ago, a reflector square glinted at knee height. Under it, the hole I now know to look for. I dug the tube out with the tip of my knife and unwrapped the tape. Relay 12, west bench. I bagged it and replaced the square because leaving. Evidence of absence is its own kind of message. I took a long looping route back toward the ditch so I could see the service road from above before it saw me. A tan sedan idled at the pull-off by the culvert, trunk cracked to the safety notch. The dome light made a soft little room in the front seat where a clipboard lay open. Nobody in the driver's seat. The door closed itself as if it had always been closed. I stayed in the trees until it left. Back at the truck, a QR sticker had been slapped low on the hitch I don't have. I peeled it and stuck it to my notebook. Later, in town, I asked a kid at the print shop if he recognized the type. He didn't, but he said he'd printed a batch of those glossy nitrogen monoxide open fires signs last month for a guy who said he was with the club. The club doesn't use glossy anything. I hunted opening morning anyway, because the ridge belongs to the deer first and then to the people who walk correctly. I took a doe at mid-morning on the north bench, 1 clean shot, 1 clean thanks. On the way out I found a laminated field audit sheet tucked into my windshield wiper. List meat, weapon, vehicle in fonts that make me tired. Pencil block letters at the bottom, audit 12 complete. I took it to the ranger office instead of the check station and said nothing until a person with a desk asked me to. He sighed. The sigh, I've learned, means add one more to the pile and put it in a folder labeled misc field. 2 weeks later, a buddy texted me a photo from a different ridge, same camera box. Same green tape, same little scratch number. He had pulled the SD card because he is braver or dumber than me and found only 10-second clips of the same 3 places: his truck's plate, his face looking up into a lens he hadn't found yet, and the no open fires sign by the kiosk. Inventory, not hunting. Practice, not poaching. Not yet, I still scout there. The cell cams rotate. The reflectors move. The fake lick refills itself with gypsum someone has to carry on purpose. When a whistle lands behind me like a thought I didn't have, I put my back to a tree and ask the woods questions a recording can't answer. If the reply is a clipboard tone in my own throat, I keep walking until I hear creak over everything and let the sound wash the schedule off my boots. Lookout at Devil's Knob closes in mid-October, when the last lightning storm moves east and the first hard frost tells the beargrass to lie down. I drew the shutdown this year, drain the tanks, shutter the windows, set the radio to sleep. It's honest work. The tower is 2 miles of stairs above the road and 30 miles of sky above everything else. It makes you smaller in the way that lets other parts get big again. On the hike up, I passed 2 detour boards that didn't belong. New cedar, arrows pointing into scrub where the tread goes straight. I photographed and left them because my pack was full of closure gear and no space for someone's jokes. At the second switchback, a metal tag winked from a post. Relay 10KNOB. Behind it, the hole. I pocketed the tube and replaced the tag so the day could pretend it hadn't been edited. The cab smelled like dry wood and old sweat. I propped windows, blew dust off the map, and logged arrived 1510. Barometer steady, wind northwest 2. The radio caught a sentence and then fed it back to me with a half-second delay, the way a cheap repeater does when it wants you to hate your own voice. I shut it off and listened to the tower breathe, every nail expanding, every plank remembering warmth. At 1840, color dropped out of the world and the ridgelines turned to paper cutouts. A pulse of white lit the east sky. Wire blink, then black. 24 seconds later, same blink, lower, like a chain of kids playing telephone with light. I set a chair on the catwalk and watched them march around the tower, one after another, until the rhythm put its hand on my shoulder. Somewhere below, in the trees where I always forget the old service road runs, a drone heartbeat flashed and steadied. The stairs hummed once like a tuning fork. 3 quiet knocks rapped the underside of the floor. I stepped out and shone my headlamp down through the grating. No eyes looking back, no faces, only the neat weight of a person making the sound they want heard, and none of the ones that would give them away. Describe your slope, I said, because I don't know any better trick. Silence. Then a recorded over here from 50 yards west where a reflector glowed. I locked the hatch and wrote the pettiness out of my hands by finishing the shutdown steps. At 21 o'clock, a headlamp crept up the stairs slow and steady. I waited at the hatch with the light off until it reached the last flight. The beam paused at the lock. "Ranger?" A voice asked, pleasant, like someone ordering at a counter. "We're here for the audit." "Audit's tomorrow," I said. "Come back with the crew." A long beat. The light tilted away. Boots descended like they were reading out loud. Morning showed footprints on the stairs that weren't mine. Narrow tread, outside edge heavy, the signature I've begun to feel like a joke I don't enjoy. On the catwalk rail, a laminated safety check card flapped. Taped fresh, list staff names. Radio's vehicle plates. I peeled it off and stuck it inside the logbook as a reminder to write the word "no more often" on. The way down I passed a white pickup with a temporary tag and a paper permit. On the dash where a district sticker should be. 2 men in generic uniforms waved in that way that keeps distance. "We've got the keys," one called, not asking. "We'll finish your audit." "It's finished," I said, and didn't stop walking. He smiled without changing his face. That afternoon the ranger office got an email from a free account with a subject line, "Relay map," and a link no one there will click. I printed it on a dead laptop and drew over it with a pencil like the old guys taught me X, where I pulled a tube. Circle where I left a tag. A slash where a voice pretended to be a person and found the wrong questions. The tower closes either way. The shutters go up, the locks get spun, the map gets put to bed. But if you go in spring and find fresh cedar detour planks pointing where the tread doesn't, take a photo and let your boots argue. If someone with a patch asks for names and plates and offers to help, ask them what the wind did at dusk. If they don't have an answer, the tower will outlast both of you. I train our volunteer SAR team on Tuesdays low-key. Practical, the kind of drills that make real nights shorter. We ran a dusk exercise last month on the Pine Needle Loop. Team of 4, lost hiker scenario, whistle protocols, voice contact, then low-angle extraction practice on the ravine. It's the loop we know best, which is why I chose it. Familiarity means you notice edits at the kiosk. Our laminated drill sheet had been replaced with a cleaner one. Emergency audit list team size, radio call signs, vehicles. The font pretended to be ours. The QR winked like a flirt. I tore it down and used our dog-eared copy from the tote. The new one went in an evidence bag with a note I wrote too hard for the pen's feelings. We staged at the trailhead at 1820. I placed the subject. One of our own at the second switchback with instructions. To answer questions wrong on purpose. We briefed the questions. Water, slope, trees. If the voice doesn't describe something real, it's a recording or it's panic. Both require different steps. At 1845, while I checked radios, a whistle sounded from halfway up the loop. 3 neat bursts. 2 of my volunteers answered reflexively. I let them. Better to see habits than pretend they aren't there. "Describe your water," I called. "Dry creek to my right," came back immediately from downhill, which is wrong. There's no creek for 200 yards. "Describe your slope," I asked. "Over here," said the downhill, which isn't an answer. I split the team 2 to hold the tread, 2 with me up the real switchback. I don't walk into recordings anymore if I can help it. The false tape started at knee-height, orange flagging stapled. Not tied, leading off to a downed log slick as soap. Past it, a little bottle cap chime on monofilament under a root ball. We disarmed it with a multi-tool and left it hanging under my jacket like a drunk metal. The subject sat where I planted him, cold but amused. "Heard the whistle?" he asked. "It's a good copy," I said, and felt the air move wrong a yard behind me where someone was adjusting nothing, on the way out. We found a pocket speaker face down near the trail junction. Still pulsing a tiny red LED, waiting to be paired. A coil of green painter's tape and a pack of thumbtacks lay under the bench by the kiosk. In the snow on the roof of the portable toilet, boot prints. Narrow, outside edge heavy. Same person who's been practicing on our ridges thinks training night is a good night to test the fence. Back at the lot. A sedan did a careful figure 8, pausing nose to nose with each of our trucks long enough that a hungry license reader would have time to eat. We don't have one, which is the only thing that made me smile. Under my wiper, a card, "Count complete, proceed south." I bagged it. The deputy who wandered by said, "Same phrase on the dam last winter." I told him that didn't make me feel less tired. We changed our drills after that. We added a step where the lost person has to describe 3 things that don't fit on a clipboard. A specific branch they can reach with their left hand. What the dirt smells like right now, and how the sky looks between 2 particular trees. Recordings can cheat one of those. They can't cheat all three without being there. 2 weeks later, a real call came at 21:10. Teenagers separated on the ridge above the loop. One text saying, "Hear whistles down the ravine. We ran the play we practice now, hold the tread. Ask the mouthy questions. Put a person with patience and bad knees at the junction to catch whoever comes out of nowhere." The kid showed at 22:05, shaking, pissed, relieved, swearing the whistle moved when I followed it. I told him sound does that in gullies. He nodded like he wanted to believe the lie I gave him so he could hate himself less. He asked me, "Do people mess with us out here?" I said, "People practice all kinds of things." He said, "Like what?" I said, "Inventory." He didn't understand. He will. The first time a card shows up on his windshield asking for names and gear like the Woods Care Dot, we still train on Tuesdays. We still blow whistles and answer poorly on purpose. We still pull thumbtacks from bark at hip height and collect speaker guts in a Ziploc that lives in the tote under Misk Field. The only change is small. When someone shouts, "Over here," we don't move until they tell us water, slope, trees. If they can't, we hold our line, and the forest keeps the part of us that knows the difference between a person and a schedule. That's the only part worth bringing home.